Hi, welcome to Storytime. Welcome back to Storytime, I should say. We are jumping back into the Hebrew Bible this week. So it is, well, we're recording on Tuesday, July 11th, but whenever you're watching this, I'm grateful. I also wanted to say I'm also just grateful that some of you are sharing links with friends. I can tell because I have more subscribers slowly and growing organically, which I kind of really like, and more viewers. I can tell more people are watching videos. So it just makes me really happy that you have found me and the work I'm doing, and that something I'm doing is useful for you all. Makes me really happy. I also have some new patrons in my Patreon account. I'm just grateful for all the ways that people are saying they like what I'm doing and are supporting me in the work I'm doing. So I just wanted to give you all a quick shout out and a quick thank you for that from the bottom of my heart. So we are in the hot days of July here, and we're jumping back into the Hebrew Bible. So we're looking at the story of Exodus, and I haven't looked ahead to see how many chapters we're going to be engaging here. But I did want to read through the first couple chapters of Exodus with you because there's a snippet related to this filter, related to the filter of sex, the relationships we call marriage, and or engage stories that talk about or refer to physical harm that engages intimate body parts. So there's a couple elements in this story, in this part of the story, that touch on that, but there are also some other really important elements that have been I've been mulling over a lot lately, and in particular, wanting to raise a question about Moses' story that I don't hear people discuss openly very often. So it's a little bit of just my basic feminist scholar wanting to talk about this, as well as wanting to air and give some people a chance to say some of the things I've seen people making comments about in my either here or just in various places when people point out some really interesting things so about these ancient stories. So here we are, story time, the book of Exodus. And I've already seen people commenting in the chat about whether or not this story about Moses is even historically accurate. So let's address that briefly up front. For those of you who've not heard of this, right? So I imagine many of you have and are well familiar with this. But if you've not heard this, let's set a little bit of a framework here. When you're talking about the historical, like the narrative of the Hebrew Bible, we often talk about it in a kind of a chronological way, because that's how we can make sense of it, is looking at what we have in front of us, and it's presented to us as if it's this chronological thing, regardless of when the various pieces were actually first created or, first told around a campfire, right? Or when they were first collected, regardless of that element, okay? What I'm trying to say here is everybody in the Hebrew Bible prior to the character of David, okay? So David comes into the story around the year 1000 BCE. And if we're going to take the narrative at all at face value, we're talking about 800 years prior to him, we start to have a narrative. Okay. So again, whether or not any of it's historically accurate doesn't matter to me in this moment. What I'd like you to consider is that everybody prior to David are just placeholders for meaning. Okay, they're not necessarily historically reliable. We can't necessarily point to a single person who lived all of these things that are narrated about them, including Moses. Okay, and many Hebrew Bible scholars who focus on David will even argue about David's historicity and the extent to which we can pin all the parts of his story onto one particular person. Okay, so yes, Moses' story parallels other ancient Near Eastern people's stories, right? We have a threat on lives of infants, and somehow they're thrown into the wilderness in some way, shape, or form. They're found by someone else, reared, by the enemy or by wolves, right? By whomever. And then they come back and do something important and significant for their people. These make great stories, right? That's why they keep being used, regardless of their historical accuracy. They are important. They give us meaning. They help people connect to a certain construct. Okay. So no, I don't think there's a particular person we should look at, but I do think there are interesting things about Moses, the character or the name, that tells us it's a very Egyptian name. Look at all the different kings or pharaohs of ancient Egypt in particular, who had Moses or MSS in their name. That's one of the things about Semitic languages, or languages in general. I love the way they kind of they have similarities, these ancient languages, and remove vowels. That's one of the best ways to start looking at connections in languages, is remove the vowels and look at the consonants that you have. And there are similar consonants, right? Ramses, I was trying to think of some of the names, and I saw it in the notes here. I was like, oh, that's really helpful. Tutmosis, Moses, Ramses. Like, there are all kinds of names that refer to Moshe, or the same set of consonants used different ways. We can say something similar. It's kind of a fun little parallel, I think, to look at things like shalom in Hebrew and salam in Arabic, right? Take out the vowels, and you have SLM, right? Or SHLM. I was recently interacting with a man from Saudi Arabia, and stopped to help me. I had a car breakdown. He stopped to help me, and I'm familiar with a Turkish form of thank you, tashakir, and well, that's not the form that he uses from Saudi Arabia, And so he said, no, we're mashakran. Well, if you take out the tu, which is second person singular, and mu, which is a form of a different form of a verb, take those two out, and you have the same consonants in those two words saying thank you, just different vowels, right? So I love studying languages for this reason. You can start to appreciate and hear some things and see some things. So what are we saying here? Is Moses originally an Egyptian character who was adapted into a Hebrew Bible or a Hebrew people's story, right? In the storyline itself, it indicates that people can tell by looking at him that he's Egyptian, right? It's worth paying attention to. Or is it his accent that makes him think that? So maybe it's not his physicality. So maybe he looks physically like a Hebrew person, and then there's the other question about who are Hebrew people to begin with. They're kind of nomad, so all kinds of things that I think are interesting. And I can imagine many people are going to take little dives into those conversations and questions, right? And I get that, respect that. And I am more of a materialist. I want to talk about what these things do, what people do with these, what we see in them, and in this particular case, the things we very often overlook in this story. So, Moses historical? Nah, not really. But he's similar to a lot of people's stories, so people get it and it works, right? And the way his particular character is used is interesting, I think. All right, so now back into my mode of this particular filter of the kinds of things I want to highlight for you. If I say something today or next Thursday or whenever that you've heard me say before, it's not because I didn't know I've already said it. I'm repeating it for the sake of repeating it, for the sake of indicating how often this stuff happens, right? And why it's important to me to point it out. We open with these lines, okay, in Exodus chapter 1. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each with his household. Again with the men. Right? I mean, the household doesn't exist without the women. It's all about the men. Like Reuben, Simeon, Levi and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun and Benjamin, Dan and Naphtali, Gad and Asher. The total number of people born to Jacob, okay? Born to Jacob. Right? I mean, it's hilarious. I didn't look at the Hebrew language there to see what that is actually, what the construct is in the Hebrew, or what we're supposed to actually do with that. How is someone born to a man? They come out of a woman's vagina. They are born to a man. But we're just taught by this language to not pay attention, right? To not notice all of the women who birthed those 70 children, 50 some children, right? The total number of people born to Jacob was 70. Joseph was already in Egypt. Then Joseph died, and all his brothers, and that whole generation. We just, jumped over a whole bunch of history, storyline right there, right? But the Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. I really wish I were watching the chat here, because it's getting kind of interesting over here. Okay, good. I know people don't include women in biblical texts. They don't do it in the Newer Testament either. They even say, like, counting, they give numbers and they say counting women and children, or including women and children. Like, we don't normally include women and children in our numbers. Right. So, Carrie Ann, yes, my point is to just keep highlighting it when it happens, because it's important to me to highlight it when it's happening, because people often say, yeah, it's a patriarchal world. So, of course, we're going to see that. Excuse me, I'm having trouble today. But my contention is that I need to point it out every time, because we are so numb to it. And it's the same in our current contexts, that people become so, it might be startling the first time you're in a new place and somebody says something that seems really odd or whatever. And then you just get used to it. Like, it seems offensive or rude or inappropriate, but then, like, over time, and people just keep saying it, and you just kind of get a little bit numb to it. That's my point in pointing it out every time I see it. The Israelites were fruitful and prolific. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now, a new king arose over Egypt, who did not know Joseph. He didn't know the whole story, didn't know anything about Joseph's contributions. He said to his people, look, the Israelite people are more numerous and more powerful than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, or they will increase and, in the event of war, join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. There are all kinds of really interesting things to me about parallels to today in these kinds of stories. Why would the native people in a land feel that way about others who've come into the space? Why is the issue about defensiveness and assuming this antagonism from people who have come in, who've migrated, unless you've just been awful to them all along, right? And what kinds of interesting insights does that help us have on today's contexts, right? I'm not trying to open that huge can of, I happen to live in the United States and I'm living on a land that used to be occupied by Native peoples, and I should know the names of all of the peoples who used to live in Roanoke, Virginia, but I don't know them. Then I'll go work on that. I really will. But I'm not trying to open that can, but maybe I should be. But in general, we continue to have immigrants into this particular country, right? And how are people who are already living here responding to immigrants coming into this country, right? Why is the reaction a threat? Why is the reaction to new people coming in defensiveness, assuming that they're coming that they have negative intentions, when really all they want to do is survive, right? The Hebrew people moved to Egypt out of a need to survive. So why is any of this antagonistic to begin with, right? I think this is really interesting and really powerful kinds of stuff for us today to be able to look at it and see what's happening. But that's totally off the topic of what I'm supposed to be talking about. Sorry. Therefore, this whole thing, come, let us deal shrewdly, or they will increase, and in the event of war, they'll fight against us. Therefore, they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. Of course they did. And it's not that different from today. Okay. They built supply cities, Pithom and Ramses for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. It sounds like you're referring to them like a disease or something, or bugs or something, but so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians became ruthless in imposing tasks on the Israelites and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in every kind of field labor. Again, I think that's an interesting parallel to today, right? Which jobs do immigrant people tend to be able to get and not be able to get? They were ruthless in all the tasks that they imposed on them. I think of all these immigrant people immigrating to this country who are very skilled in lots of fields in the country they came from, and they're forced to mop floors here, right? Or pick produce, which is ridiculous how little that pays, that kind of stuff. Interesting parallels. That's all I'm trying to say right now. The king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, now it's getting good, right? One of whom was named Shiphrah, the other Puah. When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, I love that reference. If only women still stood on birth stools to deliver, right? I'm not even trying to push a child out of a vagina, and I can appreciate the fact that standing up is going to be a lot easier for a woman than lying on her back. When you act as midwives to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it's a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, she shall live. I mean, we could dissect that for a while, right? What kind of a person can even say that about a child just brought into the world? And what kind of a mentality does that take, right, towards these other human beings, right? They are not actually human beings in your mind, if that is how you can think about a newborn from this group of people. Also, allowing the females to live makes me cringe, right? Because what is that saying they want to do or are going to be comfortable doing in the near future with these Hebrew people's daughters, right? I mean, just blah. I think of, let me just say, because it's important as I read this, that I think of various places around the world today or in the very recent history of people thinking of other groups of people in their midst or as their neighbors who are not even thought of as fully human, who are thought of as dogs or as so expendable, right? That there's this way of treating humans doesn't even, it's not even. I'm finally reading the book, The Kite Runner. And so if you've read it, you understand what it is I'm thinking of right now. And it's just, all the things are just very real. This isn't just a story, even though this is just a story. You know what I'm saying? When you act as midwives, do this. Kill the boys, let the girls live. But the midwives feared God. We have to talk about that, right? The king of Egypt brings them in, says, kill all the boys, let the girls live. But the Egyptian midwives feared God. What fantastic propaganda this book is for the God of the Hebrew people. And that is ultimately what this book is actually trying to do, is show that the God of the Hebrew people is stronger and mightier than the gods of Egypt. That is one of the primary things this book is doing. And what a fantastic way to do it, in a really odd way, is saying that even the midwives of Egypt could see their God and fear that God. even though it's the God of the people who are enslaved in Egypt. Like, that doesn't even make any sense to say that these midwives feared their God. Do you know what I'm saying? Okay, so the midwives feared God. They did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but they let the boys live. Subversive. Even if it is subversive being phrased in the context of honoring Yahweh, the God of the Hebrew people, it is still female characters who are being radically subversive. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this and allowed the boys to live?" Midwives said to Pharaoh, "Oh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwives come to them." It's a clever little response. They have too many children. They just slide right out as soon as they start pushing. I don't know. Anyway, so God dealt well with the midwives. This next part is hard for me, and that's why I'm just pausing to let you know. God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very strong. Okay, this is a good thing for the Hebrew people storyline. And because the midwives feared God, how many different ways have we said that God has favored them or they feared God, right? Very strong connection between these Egyptian people and fearing the Hebrew God. So propagandistically, it's very powerful. It also is a little bit offensive to me to say that, right? But because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Hello. It's like we're right back with Rachel and Leah, and how Leah wasn't loved, so God opened her womb. It's just gross. It's just gross. Now, I get the need for family and the need for support systems, but I got to tell you, the women I know who are doulas, because they're doulas, they are connected to the whole community. They don't, you know what I mean? Like, they'll be okay in their old age. They don't actually need a family to support them in their old age because they're literally indebted to the whole, like, half the community. So there's all that. It's thrown out so casually, right? Because the midwives feared God. Propaganda, a narrative trying to celebrate the God of the Hebrews. God gave them a family. Oh, yay, patriarchy. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, "Every boy that is born to the Hebrews you shall throw into the Nile, but you shall let every girl live." So now it's gone from trying to be closeted genocide to open, out and open, kill all Hebrew boys. I don't think this is historical, but I think on some level there's an element of it that rings true in various parts of the world over time. And that element of being a target, being sought out, having to hide, literally, think about the various points in time that you know of throughout history, where being a part of a certain group of people meant you had to hide in order to survive, right? I don't know what parts of European history you know. I don't know if this happened in places like, Eastern Asia, and I imagine it probably did, because why would this part of the world be unique in that? That is just intense. Okay. Well, let's keep moving. Let me see. Do we have comments over here? War is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Very interesting comments that I'm missing. Yes, subverting the king's will takes strength, Michael Farrell. I fully agree with you. I think, again, whether or not it's historically accurate doesn't matter. It takes courage, for sure. I'm not at all trying to deny that. In fact, I am trying to highlight the courage and the subversiveness of the women in this story. And I also think it's important to equally point out that in the end, these women still endorse not just patriarchy, but the Hebrew people who become the Hebrew or Israelite people's patriarchal family structure, ultimately, and their God. So it's such a mixed bag, right, of issues. But I very much appreciate that you said that, because I agree with you. Okay, good. I'm glad you all are saying you all are at least trying. Okay. I want to make sure I've touched on things I want to touch on. Okay, so we're moving into Moses' story specifically. Now, a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. That's appropriate, but also very interesting that we're not even. Is anyone else a little bit like given the sheep like heebie-jeebies, or what's the word for this, right? That he's marrying a second or third cousin. I guess genetically speaking, it's fine and safe at that point. Several generations down, they have a common ancestor, but it's enough generations down that doesn't matter. Okay, he went and took. I read the English here. My English is married. It will say he went and took a Levite woman in the Hebrew. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, right, because he was loud enough and starting to make noise and move around a little bit, and hard, right? Can't just cover him up in public anymore, I guess, or whatever. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it in the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. This is the part where, yeah, this isn't unique to Moses. This isn't the first time it's done, right? This is a trope that's being used to talk about a threat on the life of a child who becomes important to this people. I don't know how many people, though. I wonder this because I have had such a disconnect between these two events that I literally have to remind myself every time. His sister stood at a distance. She's not named here. She's not named until they're talking about having delivered the Israelites out of Egypt, and his sister is named Miriam in chapter 15, and she leads the dance. But it's almost like I forget that she's essential for saving his life here. Or at least for making the connection between him and his family once he's taken in by the Pharaoh's daughter, right? If Miriam hadn't been paying attention and watching what happened to her baby brother, right? According to the story, again, I don't need it to be historically accurate, but according to the story, she's the one who made sure that he had, his own mother as a nursemaid. Who cares? It could have been any woman from the Hebrew people or whatever, I suppose, But, his sister was watching out for him, right? She made the connection. So it would have been fine for him without his sister watching over him, probably. But interesting that she's a part of the storyline. And that's the same sister that gets talked about later on, who gets treated terribly unfairly, right? When Moses and Aaron and Miriam Aaron and Miriam are saying, throwing shade on Moses' wife, right? Only Miriam gets punished for that, not Aaron, all kinds of weird things. But it's the sister who was paying attention and saved his life, or at least connected him to his people differently. Anyway, whatever. It just goes unspoken of, and I don't even typically think of this person being talked about here as the woman who's leading the song in chapter 15, because she's not named, so I don't make the connection in my head. So I'm just making the connection for you if you'd been in my kind of thought about it the way I had previously. Okay. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. 3-month-old baby. Oh. This must be one of the Hebrews' children, she said, right? Because he's been put in a basket to try to save his life, right? Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Yes. So I find this so fascinating, right? These two women, young women, right? I imagine Miriam is no more than a teen-ish, right? and she's interacting with an Egyptian royalty, right? And very innocently, supposedly offering to go find a wet nurse for this child. And the Pharaoh's daughter's fine with that, and that's probably true, right? Because who cares? Like, just doing the grunt work of nursing a child, and then she'll claim him as her own. Just very interesting what's happening there between women. That's a little bit subversive, maybe not super subversive, but maybe a little bit. Shall I go get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? The Pharaoh's daughter said yes. So the girl went and called the child's own mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages. In this moment, do you think the Pharaoh's daughter knew what was happening? Did she know she was handing the child back to his mother? Did everybody know this was pretense? Did everybody know we're going to save your son, and we're just going to call it all this, and I'll even pay you to take care of your son for me so I can take him later? Did she not know? Was she not as sharp as some people? I don't know. I think it's just kind of interesting. I'll give you your wages. So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. And she named him Moses, because she said, I drew him out of the water. So the footnotes in the Bible I'm using, let us know that the Moshe, or the MSS part of his name, is Egyptian, but there's a Hebrewisation going on here in terms of his name. So from Egyptian, the name is to give birth, right? The Moshe, or the Masas, whatever, is to give birth. But similar to the Hebrew is drawing out of the water. All very fun things you can do with this kind of a story, because you're making it all up. I had a similar question as Carrie Ann did about why not an Egyptian nurse. And I imagine, and someone said it's beneath them perhaps, is the mother's milk of another culture something that changes the child's heritage? I'm not thinking of it along those lines. I'm thinking it more of she could pay a Hebrew woman less. A Hebrew woman, wet nurse, wouldn't have to be paid as much. Also, the Pharaoh's daughter, if she knows this is a Hebrew child, which according to the story she does, and she doesn't really want to draw attention to the fact that she has a foreign child that she's trying to save. And having it reared and protected by Hebrew people would help ensure her secret, right? Just food for thought. Okay. She names him Moses because I drew him out of the water, which is a fun little mixing of languages and meanings going on here. Great. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and saw their forced labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinfolk. He's seeing injustice, right? So what's your reaction to seeing legitimized injustice and exploitation of labor? What is your reaction to it? I'm actually asking you to think about that. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinfolk. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. Now, you have to I think you kind of need to pause and back up and say, this couldn't have been the first time he's seen this. He must have been reared knowing he was a Hebrew. His mother, the Pharaoh's daughter, must have told him. He must have had a connection with his people, even though she's rearing him in that royal house. I mean, think about the sketchiness and all of the secrets and how difficult that might have been for them to, know and pretend and all of that. It's kind of an interesting way to think about it, all the intrigue. I am not at all about endorsing or justifying murder, not at all. But I think it's interesting that it points out that he knows these are his people and he sees them being exploited and mistreated. And his reaction, his perhaps slightly undisciplined self-control. He must have just come from a workout where his muscles are feeling really pumped up and his adrenaline's pumping. I don't know. I'm just saying. I don't want to just sweep this under the carpet either, right? What have you actually done? I know a lot of you watching this are familiar with this. What have you done with the fact that this man was a murderer? Even though he is also a good man in a lot of ways, right? Does a lot of good things for his people. And so I'm using that language, thinking about how many different ways does that apply to situations today, and or do we need to reconsider? I don't know, but I'm trying to be honest about. I know that these things are complicated. What humans are capable of is very complicated. Did he grow up with this knowledge about the ways who his people were in this space and how they've been treated for generations? Did he know the stories? And is it just too much for him to manage anymore? And he sees it happening and lets it loose. How do people perceive someone else's righteous anger at injustice? Right? His righteous anger on a certain level. I'm still not trying to justify the murder, but it was righteous anger at injustice. Okay? Can we at least agree on that? And so why he didn't channel it well? I think there are a lot of people who can identify with it, right? And over the centuries and in various parts of the world. I think it's interesting. I just think it's a very interesting story. And I said in the notes for today's video, I am often troubled by this element of Paul's story in the Newer Testament. I'm sorry, this is way off topic for my supposed filter for the stories I'm talking about. But I'm just going to do it for today. Paul in the Newer Testament outright admits that he used to be a part of killing other Jews. So not even the enemy, not even other people, which is what Moses is doing. He's actually identifying with the people being exploited and oppressed, and he kills someone who's not his own people, right? In this case, Paul in the Newer Testament admits to killing other Jews. And that's both in his own words and in the storyline that's very much a fiction in the book of Acts. He's a murderer. He's an actual murderer. And yet his word is taken at face value. I don't know. I feel like I want a little bit of both on this. I want us to be honest that we can have the people who, I also, here's the thing about Moses and Paul is I see their acts of the murderous moments is very different. What's narrated, at least for Moses, is righteous anger at injustice and at the enslavement of people and exploitation of people. That's a little bit different than the anger that comes from Paul in his acts of killing other Jews, because the Jews he's killing or he's rounding up to be persecuted are calling out the injustice. Right? They're actually angry about the injustice in the same way that Moses is angry about the injustice here. They're angry about it. And that's what gets them killed is they want to call it out. They want to call out the the man. Call out speaking truth to power. That gets you killed. So we have these two men in this faith tradition who are admitted murderers for very different reasons. And yet we don't use that as a way to humanize people who have been convicted of murder. No, not that I know of. Maybe people do in prison setting, like in prisons, like prison Bible studies. Probably do, actually. But the people who need to see it differently are not the people behind the bars, but the people on this side who are thinking judgy thoughts, Anyway, let me just keep moving. Okay, so back to Moses. Carrie Ann, not within the law of the Jews, but he was doing it out of my assessment of the situation is he was angry at a segment of the population who were trying to speak up about their exploitation, and Paul was benefiting from the exploitation in the same ways that the priestly class were, in the same ways that any of the men associated with the temple in Jerusalem were benefiting from the overtaxation of the people. So that's how I think of Paul, his connection to the temple, and how there's any way at all for him to have been rounding up other Jews for arrest and persecution and sometimes execution. He was friends with, at the very least, right, the elite, the people in power, and the people in the men in the temple who were charged with collecting the taxes on behalf of the empire, but were also taking advantage of that situation. There's no other way in my mind to make sense of any of the story at all, unless you see Paul that way. And I assure you that this has been more than 20 years of my regular thinking about all of this stuff. So it isn't necessarily lawful, right? It's the same desire to put down a movement or a potential uprising that we see in the Hebrew Bible prophets. When a prophet comes to a king in the Hebrew Bible prophets and just starts speaking some truth, even if they're saying in really kind of bizarre ways, the men and people that are being charged with these things, they know what's going on. They know what's being said to them. And some of the prophets were killed for trying to speak truth to these men in leadership. And at the time, the prophets were trying to connect it to faithful frameworks. Keeping of the covenant with this God means that you take care of each other. And you as the leader are supposed to be leading the way in that, and you are actually taking advantage of your people instead of taking care of your people. Goodness, I'm sorry. Oh, the chat is getting good. Yeah, right. Is Moses a murderer, or hero? Good. That's exactly where I want your questions and comments to go. Oh, Daryl, thank you. Jonathan Haidt, I love his work, and I feel like I haven't read enough of it, but considering, and then another comment, considering the violence of the Old Testament, I prefer that you call it Hebrew Bible, by the way, because Old Testament is a Christian label for a Jewish collection of writings, just FYI. Moses killing that Egyptian small potatoes. It is, but it also isn't, because Moses is a big deal, becomes a very big deal. And in fact, from a Jewish perspective, he's more important than Abraham, in a sense. He brings the law. He gives the Israelite people the law. He sets the people free. So Moses is a big deal. And it's because of that I wanted to raise this question. And I am not trying to say one thing or another. I'm trying to problematize and muddy the waters a little bit with my comments. So I'm really glad you all are chatting about this. I appreciate seeing your comments here. Paul serial killer fanfic needs to be written. Oh my gosh. I think I just, oh, please write that. Please write that. Oh my gosh, that just made my day. Oh. Okay, I need to keep going. Yes, this is true. This is a really important point, right? Michael Fuller, I don't know you, but I think of oh, that's interesting. Actually, I misread it, but I'm okay with it. I hope you're okay that I just highlighted your comment. Matthew's story as an analog to the Passover rather than this one. I would say that Matthew's story is an analog to almost everything in the Hebrew Bible that he could make it a parallel to. He quotes 81 times from scriptures, whether it's from the Hebrew Bible or other ancient writings that the Jewish people of the first century would have known of. So Moses' story is paralleled in Jesus' birth narrative, right? Jesus' birth narrative in Matthew is utterly fiction, even though some people don't know that and think that there was actually the slaughter of the innocents that is narrated in Matthew's gospel, but it's not historically accurate. We have pictures of it because it's in there, and people think it's historical because we have pictures of it. Not. So the threat on Moses' life as a child, threat on Jesus' life as a child, calling out of Egypt. There's a reference in Matthew's birth narrative, says that just like I called my son out of Egypt, and blah, 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 blah. And so I think it's very difficult to limit Matthew's parallel or an analog to just one thing. And in fact, Jesus doesn't become the sacrificial lamb of the Passover until John's gospel. He's not that in the synoptics. So whereas I'm not trying to say that your idea about this analog isn't true, I'm saying that there's much more than just that. And the Gospel of Matthew is divided into 5 sections. 5, the Torah, right? Too many things, these laws being given, actually received allegedly on Mount Sinai, and then Jesus re-inscribing and reinterpreting those same laws on a mountaintop, right? I think it's difficult to limit it, but I do think that there are very strong parallels between Moses' story and the way Matthew chooses to tell Jesus' story, right? Okay, so let's go back to this story, and we can wrap this up for today. So I'm backing up a little bit. One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to his people and saw their forced labor, right? He's heard about this for years, right? He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his kinfolk. He looked this way and that, right? And seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand, which isn't going to last very long. But anyway, when he went out the next day, he saw 2 Hebrews fighting. And he said to the one who was in the wrong, which is also kind of interesting because, usually when it's, anyway, why do you strike your fellow Hebrew? And he answered, who made you ruler and judge over us? And I want to say, the Pharaoh's daughter did. But anyway, do you mean to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? We saw you. And Moses was afraid and thought, surely the thing is known. Which is interesting, right? Not, I did something wrong, but now people know I've done something. Like, do you see what the thing is known. And when Pharaoh heard of it, he sought to kill Moses. I just think that the response is really fascinating. It's not, oh shit, I'm going to be held accountable for killing somebody. It's, oh no, people know now. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, there's a difference. There's a difference in feeling bad for having done it and just nervous that you've been caught for doing something. Very different issues. Anyway, but Moses fled from Pharaoh. He settled in the land of Midian and sat down by a well. Now, anyone who has read through Genesis knows what's about to happen. A man at a well, there's probably going to be some women involved. Probably going to have a little bit of a matchmaking happening, right? The priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. But some shepherds came and drove them away. Dun, dun, dun. Moses got up and came to their defense and watered their flock. It's like the Isaac and Rebecca coming together, and then Jacob's story. It wasn't good enough. We had to throw in we had to throw in a villain to make it more interesting, since we're going to tell this story again for the third time at least, and we need a little more juice to make it interesting or something, whatever, right? Some shepherds came and drove them away. Moses got up and came to their defense and watered their flock. When they returned to their father Reuel, he said, "How is it that you've come back so soon today?" So this is some bullying that these 7 women have been experiencing for a long time. Well, an Egyptian helped us against the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. Like, role reversal here. Reuel said to his daughters, "Where is he? Why did you leave the man? Invite him to break bread." This is a good guy. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? Moses agreed to stay with the man, and he gave Moses his daughter Zipporah as a woman. My English says in marriage. She bore a son, and he named him Gershom, for he said, "I have been an alien," which in the Hebrew is ger. I've been an alien residing in a foreign land. After a long time, 20 years, however many years, right? The king of Egypt died. I love that part about this. This makes it so similar to fairy tales when it does that, like, oh, so-and-so had 5 children, and then we did this. It's like, oh, right. Time in fairy tales really isn't realistic, and, it's not realistic here either, and throughout this whole thing, right? So after a long time, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned under their slavery and cried out. I mean, they've been doing so for years, right? Out of the slavery, their cry for help rose up to God. God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Not with Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebecca, Jacob and all his women. No, just with the men. Just with the men. Again, I know I've said it before. I don't think you need me to say it again, but I'm saying it again because it needs to be said and pointed out that every single fucking time we're referring to families, it's just through the men's names. The covenant is just with the men. The covenant is just marked on the penis. The covenant, the men, the people, it's all about the men. Even though none of them will be here without the women. God looked upon the Israelites and God took notice of them. We could write a book on that paragraph alone, right? The way the narrator has chosen to describe God as not paying attention to the slavery of his people until they start to moan and groan about it and cry out about it. And he heard them and remembered his covenant as if it wasn't present to him the whole freaking time. The way ancient people talk about the gods is really fascinating. And please do not ever consider it as anything other than anthropomorphization. It's telling us how they thought about people and themselves and the world. I really think we need to redefine what God is, and I really think it needs to get way beyond any kind of being at all, because being, we can't help but anthropomorphize and give it intention and all kinds of stuff. But that's what gods are. They're mini us's in some sort of deified space. Anyway, or huge mega us's in deified space. I'm seeing a lot of people talking about God, trying to redefine how they think about and talk about God, but people are still talking about God as if God is a relational being that is going to respond to us being nice or kind to them, which is still a very similar issue. And I'm very much off topic again. I can't help it because there's so much going on in the world right now that I want to comment on, but I'm trying to stay focused on my purpose here. I think the extras are okay, but I don't want to get too sidetracked. Maybe I'll do a redefining God series. That's what I should do. Let's redefine God. So back to the story. So we have over and over the story about the Israelites is still being talked about by the men. The women are the ones who've made the story possible, whether through childbirth, whether through protecting children as doulas, or protecting infants as the older sister watching out for her brother. So we have subversive women making, or just women being women using their uteruses, making things happen without any sort of acknowledgement, unless, of course, like with the doulas, the midwives in the story, they are Egyptian and they bow down to the God of the Hebrews, right? So their courage, I do want to highlight, and I also want to make sure you see that their courage is being framed through a connection to the Hebrew people's God, which I'm not okay with, because that is a literary form of proselytization, right? They are making these women courageous because they fear God, not because they have a moral backbone. Do you know what I'm saying? How many times have you heard someone say you can't be moral without God, or you can't be moral without a religion? And while it offends me deeply, I understand why they think that. Their scriptures teach them to think that way, right? It's the same as with every other topic that I've ever tried to take on today in my work as a biblical scholar, which is most currently about marriage in the Bible. But when people say you can't be moral without God, it's because that's how they're, not just the framework they grew up in and blah, 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 but like stories like this contribute to that, right? They can't just be moral people who care about humanity, or who care that killing an infant is ridiculous, is awful and atrocious, and they won't do it, right? It can't just be that. It has to be because they feared God, the Hebrew people's God, not the Egyptian gods. So we have women who are essential to the storyline, but again, they become, they're either not named, or they're not really talked about, or they're, thank you for your service, now go. Anyway, we'll see where this takes us tomorrow. Okay. Let's see. Albert Schweitzer said that Jesus was like looking down a well. Yes, the face looking back at you looks very familiar. Absolutely. All of any historical Jesus book that is published, the depiction of Jesus in that book will tell you the focus and interest of the scholar, right? Yes, the essentialization of Jesus in any book, and there are quite a few that have been published over the last 100 years, right, of the historical Jesus, who he actually was. That tells you who the scholar is. Absolutely. And I own that as well. My essentialization of Jesus is through a lens that makes sense to me. And it's not the same one I grew up with. So I've had to come to that by looking at things and trying to understand history. And it's a little bit of what's in there and a lot of what's not. But yeah, every depiction of these people will tell you what the scholar or the person writing is most interested in, for sure. Thank you for being here. I wanted to share, for those who are still willing to stick around, I wanted to share one of the quotes, one of the blurbs just came in today for my new book. And it's someone that some of you, I think, may know from Myth Vision or from other deep drinks, or, maybe you follow him on Twitter or TikTok. Josh Bowen, who wrote the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, and he also did the Old Testament endorse slavery. That's how I met him, was doing a panel on slavery. What does the Christian Bible endorse slavery or not? We did a panel for Deep Drinks a few months ago. I got to represent the Christian the Newer Testament, but his blurb just came through, and I wanted to share it. So much ink has been spilled on the institution of marriage and what the Bible says about it. But have we misunderstood key passages that are often cited in the discussion? Jennifer Bird's Marriage in the Bible, What Do the Texts Say?, shines light on this complicated subject by providing fresh and much needed insights into well-known verses, revealing the ancient context for these foundational passages. This is essential reading for anyone interested in meaningfully engaging on the topic in a modern context. And I have not yet thanked him for that. Let's see. And then if you're still here, let me just do one other thing. I'm going to present this. If you're interested, the website, the publisher's website is actually a little bit hard to find because for whatever reason, but it's Roman and Littlefield, but the name of the website is just roman.com. So maybe whatever, you can get to this page through my personal website if you want to, but I just wanted you to see that there are quite a few. There's a script here, a summary of what's being said in this book that I've written. There are a handful of reviews that are all that I'm really pleased with, and as well as the one that I just read hasn't been put up on there. And there's a table of contents if you're interested in to see what it is I'm touching on in this book, and you can pre-order it here or on Amazon. So there you have it. I appreciate you all sticking around. Thanks for being here. I'm glad you found me, and I'm glad that you keep coming back. I'm glad that there's something useful in what I'm doing, something useful for you in what I'm doing. And thank you for telling your friends about it. It means a lot to me. It really does. I appreciate the honest, genuine, organic growth of my channel, right? It's really encouraging to me. So thank you. And thanks for showing up. Thanks for watching later. And hope there was something useful for you. And I will see you Thursday. See you next time.